And we're back on Shardlight Radio, and today I want to talk about a deck that I've been playing around with called Drawn All Day. This deck features Jillian the Witch Queen as my champion and Sola as the spirit. I am going to go over what a lot of these cards do in detail. I figure the game's new enough that maybe not everybody has all the cards memorized. At some point I will probably start just assuming everybody knows what the various cards do, but for now, if that is annoying to you, I'm sorry that I'm going into that much detail. Jillian the Witch Queen has one power. It is exhaust, reveal any number of spells from your hand, and reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a spell with cost equal to or less than the number of cards revealed from your hand, add it to your hand. The idea of this deck is that I want to draw all my spells, I want to have a huge grip, and I want to win on card advantage. Sola as a spirit lets me access some light spells that I think are really good, and I've got some guardians in here for Sola to ready so that I've got like some good defensive plays. And of course Sola can be soul bursted to generate a 2000 power Knight Guardian. My shard deck is pretty obvious. At this point in the game, you look at what color your spirit is and you run 3 copies of the appropriate crystal. So I have 3 hallowed crystals and 7 argent shards. I have not yet started testing with the legendary shards that are coming out in Generations Pack 1. My units, I have 3 copies of the Azure Seer. This 1 cost 1000 power unit has the arrival effect that lets you look at the top card of your deck and either put it on the top or the bottom. I'm a huge fan of this effect. Draw fixing is a mechanic that I always value very highly in every card game I play, and 1000 power on a 1-drop is fine. The main reason I have this unit is because I want to be able to start my game off by draw fixing the top of my deck. This of course works with Jillian to help make sure that there's a spell on top of your deck that you can draw once you use her power. Next drop, 2-drop, 2000 power Azure Guardian. This is a 2000 power unit that has Guardian. It's there to kind of protect my face and make the job of my opponent a little bit more difficult. Next up, the 3 copies of Ash, the Glacial Sorcerer. This card is a real wall of text, and that's kind of thematically appropriate for what the card does. So when you play a water spell, you can place an ice wall counter on a non-destroyed tower you own. Each one of these counters counts for an additional 500 defense. You can also remove all ice wall counters from all towers you own and deal damage to target unit equal to the number of counters removed times 500. Playing Jillian to have a lot of spells, and what Ash does is allow those spells turn into disruption. If you're playing an aggro deck, they're going to have a harder time getting at your towers because of these ice wall tokens, or it can be targeted removal if you're playing against something that's putting big threats out. Kind of skipped right past 2 to 3. I did actually consider the yellow 2-drop, what is it, the Quorum Phalanx, I think, as another guardian. That plays really well with Sola. At this point in testing, I've opted to have more of the light spells. Even though Ash only triggers on water spells, I just wanted more spells in general in the deck, and I ultimately cut that Phalanx. But that is a totally reasonable play, and maybe even a more consistent play. I have had a little bit of trouble getting run over in the early game. Next up, I have the 3-drop May Use Assistant. This card is just clutch for this deck. The whole point of Jillian is being able to put lots of spells into play. May Use Assistant allows you to put spells into play for cheaper. She's also a 2000 power, which is not bad. Although the reason this card's in the deck is because water spells are reduced by 1 cost. I did have 2 5-drops for a while, but I ultimately cut the Mist Mage to make room for a 4-drop, which is the Silver Watchwoman. So this is a 2000 power unit that is, I guess they call it Argent in this game, but basically neutral. It has the arrival ability of putting 2 counters on the card. You can then remove a counter to give the card quickness or target attack or prevent the damage that would be dealt. Play this, pop both counters, and now you have no summoning sickness and you can take out a target. That's pretty awesome. This is a good all-around card. It has been finding its way into a lot of my decks just because of its versatility. The only 5-drop I actually ended up keeping in the deck at this juncture is the Akuma Juggernaut. Ayakuma? I'm not sure how to say that. This is a 3000 power unit with Guardian. When it uses Guardian, you activate it after the battle, which is great. And he also allows you to Shard Drain, and it can't be targeted by spells or abilities this turn. So you can play this guy out. 3000 power is great. Guardian is great. Being able to use Guardian more than once a turn is great. And you have a way to protect him built into the card. This is just a fantastic card all the way around. The top end of my curve is 3 copies of the Stormcaster of the Azure Tower and 1 copy of the Twilight Knight. Twilight Knight is a 3000 power legendary unit with Destroyer, and when it comes into play, you can kill a unit with Guardian, and if you do, it gains quickness. This is maybe the best card in the game right now, much like Silver Watchwoman has been finding its way into basically every deck I've been building lately. Stormcaster of the Azure Tower, I do have 3 copies currently. I'm not sure that's right. I feel like that could go down to 2 and just leave me with 3 6-drops total, counting the Twilight Knight, and that's probably a better place to be, but at this point in testing, this is where I'm at. This card also has Destroyer, and it has an arrival effect that if there is a destroyed water tower, return up to 2 target units your opponent controls to the bottom of their deck in any order. That's brutal. Not only does it take, a nice beefy 6-cost threat and remove it from play, it puts it on the bottom. So that thing is gone for the rest of the game. He also sports 4000 power, which is pretty fantastic. My other 6-drop only being 3000 power. Currently, we don't have any towers in the game that require you to be bigger than 1500. Those stats are overkill for tower killing, but there are some threats that may need to be dealt with. Dealing with threats, we got a bunch of spells in this deck. There's 22 units and 22 spells. Jillian loves her spells, and I love drawing cards. Ancient Serpent's Breath. This is an insta-cast 1-cost spell. It returns target unit with cost 2 or less to its owner's hand, then the owner draws a card. Notably, if there is not a unit in play with cost 2 or less, you can't play this card. It does have an additional shard drain effect, but you have to do the default text in order to get access to the shard drain. So the additional cost of the shard drain allows you to return target unit to the top of its owner's deck. So this is a 1-cost spell that if you shard drain it, which is a fairly significant cost, let's be realistic, that doesn't just cost you a shard going into your next turn, it can set you behind for the rest of the game. So doing the shard drain early can be dangerous, but it lets you bounce 2 units, and potentially if you bounce one of your own units, you can even draw a card. So there's a lot of flexibility here. You can clear threats off the opposing board, but you can also use it to beef up your own card advantage. 3 copies of Tidal Rush. This is an instacast spell that allows you to return target unit to its owner's hand, then draw a card. So it kind of does the same thing Ancient Serpent's Breath does, except I'm the one who gets to draw the card, even if you're the one who loses your unit. This card also has a shard drain effect, and it allows you to return a unit to its owner's hand. So much like Ancient Serpent's Breath, this card can clear 1 unit or it can clear 2, and there's some card generation. Phantasmal Guards. Now this is the 1 cost that you really want to get early. It's a 1-cost spell that puts 2 500 power units with Guardian into play. These units are great, slows down aggro, and it can just kind of clog up your opponent's potential plays. I then have 3 copies of Shards of Winter. This spell, it costs 4, which is a little expensive, but it's an insta-cast and it exhausts all units your opponent controls. So if you get really into trouble, you can float 4 shards and on your opponent's turn, tap out their whole board and prevent them from having any attacks. 3 copies of Omega Magic Mizu. So this is the water Omega Magic, instacast, and like all the other Omega Magics, if you have 2 or less towers remaining, it gets better. So you get to choose 1, or if you have 2 or less towers, you get to choose 2 of the following 3 effects. You can draw a card, you can exhaust a unit, or you can return a unit to its owner's hand if it's exhausted. It's a little bit of removal, or it can be a little bit of card advantage depending upon what part of the game you play it in, and late game it gets much better. All these Omega Magic cards are good. 3 copies of the 2-cost spell Holy Slash. This is 3 of our yellow slots granted by Sola being the spirit. This lets you destroy an attacking unit. It's not great to float power, but there are several effects in here that late game, even if you don't have it in hand, by floating shards, your opponent has to think about it, and that can make them attack suboptimally because they're worried about some of these effects. Being able to just flat out destroy an attacking unit regardless of its power is pretty good. That's a very strong spell. 3 copies of Omega Magic Hikari. This is the light Omega Magic spell, instacast, cost 2. It puts 1 Knight token with Guardian and 1000 power into play, and if you have 2 or less towers, you get 2 tokens instead. So this continues the theme of having a lot of Guardian units. I want to be able to disrupt my opponent's attacks and make things really awkward for them while drawing up my whole deck. The final spell that I have in here is 1 copy of the 4-cost light spell Finishing Ray. This destroys all units. A lot of us may refer to this as a Wrath of God effect, but this board wipe is kind of the emergency lever that you can pull if you lose control of the board early. this is a way to claw your way back in. I'm losing on board, you got a bunch of units, I've got a good size hand, I hit this reset button. Maybe it takes most of, if not my whole turn to play it, but then going into next turn, a bunch of your stuff is in the KO pile because you had played it out to the board, and I end up with this big grip of options, and it can be a way to flip the board and dig my way back into a game. This deck is still kind of in the testing phase, particularly with the 4/6 drops. I've got my eye on that, and the low number of kind of mid-range units. I've got my eye on those two things. I may need to cut back on the spells a little bit, and of course we're over the 40 cards. In general, I try to play with the fewest number of cards and just the best, smallest list I can as a kind of general philosophy. I'm not opposed to playing with a deeper deck, and a deck that has this much draw built into it, and a game where you lose if you draw your whole deck. Being over 40 cards might not be a problem, but this is still kind of in the experimental phase. I will include a link to the deck I call Drawn All Day in the show notes, and until next time, go win some games.